Chris, you mentioned ultimately.
Just to let everybody know, we are recording this. If you need to black out your cameras, or if you want to black out your cameras or whatever, I am going to mute everybody. If you have questions, it's easier for us to just put them in the chat, please, and we'll monitor those as we go. We will have some time at the end where we can unmute and ask questions as well. But thanks for joining us, and I'm going to let Mike take over here. Mike, let me do the mute thing and then unmute you.
Okay.
Wrong mic. All right, Mike, you should be unmuted now.
Okay. Can you hear me, Chris?
I can. We're good.
Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Raymer. I'm with the Georgia Council on Economic Education, and I'm also, in addition to that, a consultant for the Transatlantic Outreach Program, or TOP. And you can see from the screen there, I was a TOP fellow in 07, in 2012, and again in 2016. And today we're going to spend some time, the next 58 minutes, talking about what TOP is, resources that all of you as teachers can gather from TOP, and toward the end of the webinar we're going to talk about study tours to Germany that I've been fortunate enough to go on a couple of times, and I know some other people on the call have been on some study tours as well. The way we're going to work this is Chris is going to be the man behind the screen, kind of running and advancing slides, and we're going to do a survey and a quiz and things like that to keep you involved. And we're also going to be using the chat box for a couple different activities that we're going to do. And when we get to the lesson, I'll explain more of how we're going to involve the chat box. But just keep in mind that, as Chris mentioned a couple minutes ago, you are going to have time at the end to ask questions, either about the lesson, the resources, or the study tour going forward. So Chris, go ahead and hit the next slide. And the agenda for today's webinar, you can see there, welcome introductions, we've done that. Chris Cannon at the Georgia Council, Mike Raymer at the Georgia Council. In a second, I'm gonna give you a brief overview of TOP and TOP resources. And throughout this PowerPoint, I've included a number of links to the TOP page, whether it's the resource page or the study tour page. And at the end of this, you're gonna get an email from Chris, and it'll include this PowerPoint with all the links that you need for it, and information on how to get the lesson plan that we're going to look at. We're also going to actually do a lesson that I wrote about BMW moving to South Carolina. It's an inquiry lesson from TOP's newest lesson plan resource that, again, you can find a link, and you can either order online and have the paper copy sent to you, or you can use it as a lesson straight off the internet. And I mentioned we'll talk about the TOP study tours and then have the Q&A at the end. And all throughout this PowerPoint, you'll see different photos of Germany that I took some of them, not all of them, during study tours. And so if you have questions about where that is or things like that, you can ask that as well. All right, next slide, Chris. So TOP itself, if you're not familiar, if this is your first time ever hearing about TOP, again, their website is right there. It's the Transatlantic Outreach Program, founded in 2002. And their mission, you can see, I won't read the whole thing, but basically for social studies and STEM subject teachers and educators, they're producing classroom materials. They conduct workshops like this, for instance. They have virtual exchanges, and they have the study tours that to date, more than 1,700 educators from North America have been on study tours to Germany. Their goal is to bring Germans and North Americans together to, as it says, enhance global competence of students, bridge the skills gap between education and workforce development. I think Germany as a whole is way ahead of us as far as bringing educators and students and workforce developers together. They do a really great job of bringing students into manufacturing facilities, for instance, and training them as apprentices and then hiring them on later in life. They also, TOP also wants to strengthen the grassroots bonds of the Transatlantic Partnership, which has been a fantastic one. And you can see that TOP is a public-private partnership. Their funding comes to the German Federal Foreign Office, the Goethe Institute, Deutsche Bank, who I'm sure all of you have heard Deutsche Bank, Robert Bosch Stiftung, and Siemens Corporation, another very well-known German company, which has a facility here in Georgia. All right, next slide. The top teaching materials, the key point I want you to see here is that they're yours if you want at no financial charge. So I'm a former classroom teacher that used top resources in my classroom, and I loved them for a number of reasons. One was that there was no financial charge. Two, they were very much in tune with what I was teaching. I was teaching economics, so within most of these publications, there's an economic strand of lessons and materials that you can use, in addition to history and civics and geography. So some of the some of the resources you can see there. This is not all of the list. They have a very long list of resources they produced. This is just a few of them. And when we're done here at the top of the hour, I highly recommend you going to the website here and doing a little researching yourself. I know right now, with what's going on, and all of you have been sort of told, you're going to be teaching online now, so you're probably looking for activities and things your students can do. And I know there's a lot of many great resources in here that you can use with your students tomorrow without, a lot of prep work on your end. And the lesson that I'm going to demonstrate with you today, I think, is a good example of that. All right, next slide, Chris. All right, so as I mentioned, the lesson that we're going to look at, it's called BMW in South Carolina. And I know there's a lot of South Carolina teachers on the webinar today, and I'm very excited about that. You can see the different focus areas within this particular resource. And I mentioned geography, history, contemporary German society, civics and government. We got the economics, and lastly, a section on sustainability. So what I want to do before we actually start this lesson, you can see a question down at the bottom of that page, and I would like you to, each of you, all 64 of you, if you would, if you could type in the answer to that question in the chat room, just so we can kind of see how well this is going. And the question is, where is BMW's largest manufacturing facility in the world? All right, well, one person said I have no idea, but most everyone on here is answering either Greer or Spartanburg, South Carolina near Clemson. That's great. If you ask the same question to your students, do you think they're all going to answer South Carolina? Maybe the folks who live in South Carolina. I'm guessing if I was to ask this to my students when I was teaching, they would have all said Germany. Definitely Germany. It's a German company. Someone said Pittsburgh. So the point of this question is to get kids thinking about, maybe, where is this place? And again, a lot of them outside of South Carolina probably won't know that it's South Carolina. But this lesson is going to get into why it is that, Spartanburg, South Carolina has this massively huge, largest manufacturing facility in the world for BMW. All right. Next slide, Chris. So the lesson itself, it's a case study inquiry lesson. It's lesson 5.5 in this resource. And when you do get it, I want to tell you that everything that you need to do the lesson is right there within the lesson itself. And I would really, if I was in your shoes and I'm teaching high school students, I would feel totally confident of going over this lesson today and then having my students do it tomorrow. If you're teaching them virtually, which probably many of you are. And it asks three main supporting questions. First one being, what economic factors led BMW to select Greer for their first manufacturing facility outside of Germany? Second one, what are the economic benefits for South Carolina? And the third one, how will proposed steel and aluminum tariffs affect BMW's ability to produce vehicles in South Carolina? So as we go through this, I'm going to kind of break it out into three different parts. And we'll focus on part one, talk about it, two, talk about it, three, talk about it. And that's kind of how I would approach it with my students. So this really could be like a 3-day online sort of project for your students where they don't have to try to tackle this all at once. In the classroom, however, when we do get back into the classroom, I think there's some really great interactive, active learning type activities within the lesson that would be fun to do in the classroom. And I would certainly do this when I was back in the classroom as well. All right, so Chris, if we would hit the next one, please. All right, so we're going to start with this little video called "Does It Make Sense?" BMW video.
Does it make sense that a German car company would break ground in Spartanburg, South Carolina and call it home?
Does it make sense that they build over 400,000 sports activity vehicles a year?
And customize them millions of different ways. Does it make sense?
Does it make sense?
Does it make sense that BMW's largest factory in the world
is in this small town in the South?
It makes perfect sense.
The BMW X4, X5, X6, and the all-new X3, designed in Germany, built in America.
Okay, so this ad is a couple years old now. I think it might have run during a Super Bowl, maybe 2 Super Bowls ago. And you can see from the ad, they're making the X series, which is SUVs. So the BMW SUVs are made in South Carolina, and the question is, does it make sense? Why are they doing it here and not, you know, in Germany or someplace else? Okay, Chris, next slide. And again, just to give your students a sense of where, you know, Spartanburg is versus Munich, it's 4,600 miles between the two cities. And if your students did say, yeah, all these, you know, the largest manufacturer for BMW is in Germany, and you show this, they might be surprised. And this also leads to a lot of great questions of, you know, why would they come so far away from their home country to build SUVs in South Carolina? All right, next slide, Chris. So what we want to do, and I'm going to change my screen a little bit here. Okay, what we want to do with the first part of this lesson, and again, something I would assign my students, we're going to ask this question: what economic factors led BMW to select Greer for their first manufacturing facility outside of Germany? And in a second, each of you is going to be doing a survey that Chris is going to walk you through. And the directions when you get to the survey are this. We're going to pretend we're going to travel back in time. Let's say it's the early 1990s, and you're a high-level executive at BMW, and you've been given the task of ranking a list of factors your company is examining before deciding where to locate this new manufacturing facility. So you've not built it yet. You have not even picked a place yet. You're in Germany. You're thinking about it. And what you're going to do here in a second, you're going to read the list, and there's 7 factors. And I want you to rank order from most important, which is going to be number 1, to least important, in your opinion, which is going to be number 7. And basically, you're going to drag and drop on this survey that Chris is going to pull up here in a second. And when everyone's done, we'll come back and we'll see a graph, and we'll see like what you picked as far as what was the most important, least important in your opinion. So Chris, take it away.
Absolutely. All right. So on the screen there, you see a bit.ly link that you can type into a web browser. And I apologize earlier. I should have told you you're going to need a web browser pulled up during this. We're going to send you to 2 things during the workshop here. So bit.ly/BMW ranking is where you want to go. And if you have done it correctly, it will pull up this screen here. Oh, not that. You won't pull up my email. That would be weird if it did. It will pull up this screen here. You should be able to see this. And basically what you're going to do is exactly what Mike said. There are 7 cards in this portal square rectangle thing over here on the left. And you basically grab a card and drag it over. And your goal is to put the number 1 thing on your list at the top, and then slide everything down in reverse order. So most important at the top, least important at the bottom. When you get to the ranking itself, you'll see if you drag something in between things, you can put it in between, you can reorder things once they're over here. So it's all quite user-friendly. And when you're ready to go, you can go ahead and start now. So again, the website is in the chat box. It's bit.ly/BMW ranking. I'll put it in the chat box again so it refreshes. We're going to give you 4 or 5 minutes on this, and then we'll reveal the results here in just a minute. I'm actually going to pause the recording on this. That should be what we had yesterday. Can you see the results?
Yep.
All right, cool. So that's with 43 people in. So.
Okay. All right. So obviously you can see the rankings there. Transportation infrastructure all the way on down to low cost of land. I'm looking specifically for, look at the third one down, low cost of labor. I am thinking back when I taught high school economics for, I guess it was 9 years. And when I got to my international trade unit and asked this question about why would a company relocate to another country, what's most important to them? And probably 9 times out of 10, my students would say, well, low cost of labor. So I would guess when you do this with students, you're going to see that ranking pretty high. And as you know, I mean, if you're in South Carolina or another state, you're probably familiar with the idea that these jobs at places like BMW here, it's not exactly low cost labor. Many of the people that work there earn a pretty high income. Chris mentioned the Kia plant here in Georgia. We've toured there a number of times, and I think the last time I visited there, the people that started Kia make like $22 an hour. This again is a good way to get students talking and thinking about what it is that companies are looking for when they decide to move from, let's say, Germany to another country, specifically to South Carolina. All right, so Chris, if we want to hit the next slide.
Sure. Let me just say one thing to the teachers who want to use this. We have run this through our survey gizmo because we wanted to be able to display that ranking that you're seeing there on the screen. I will recreate a version of this either in Socrative or Quizlet or something like that that's shareable. So then you can just run the same survey we just did. Mike, I don't know if you noticed, and it's interesting probably for other people, when I refreshed it and we have more results now, that low cost of labor actually moved down 1. Yeah. So now it's,
and the taxation tariff policy is number 1. That's
taxation tariff went up. Yeah. So yeah, it turns out it does.
Pro-business climate. And again, if you want to take this a couple steps further, you can ask your students things like, why are most foreign vehicle manufacturers in the United States in the Southeast? And a lot of it comes down to taxation and pro-business kind of states. Anyway, and that definitely reflects that.
And Daniel Subject pointed out a lack of unions as well.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so next slide, Chris. Okay, so as it turns out, the answer to this is, there's no right one answer. All of these factors were critically important to BMW when in the early 90s when they were sitting in a boardroom in Germany saying, all right, what are we going to do? These are the things that they really worry about and think about and consider. So it's not just low cost of labor or low taxes. It's a combination of all of those things. Because let's say hypothetically, you've got, 6 of these things are great. And it's like, yeah, we can check all the boxes, but you're in the middle of Montana and there really is no, public infrastructure like roads and things to get your BMWs to market or anywhere near a port. So it really has to be a combination of all of those things coming together to sort of make companies want to go different places and be profitable. Because again, they're trying to be very, very profitable. One thing I can throw in some of the readings I did for this is that BMW knew, at the time in the early 90s, the United States was their #1 market for vehicles. And it was, they're thinking about making SUVs and they realized, gee, we're selling all of our SUVs basically within the United States. So it made sense to be very close to the market. So our market demand really brought them here in one of the factors, in addition to those 7. Okay, so when you get here in the lesson, it talks about this BMW locating in South Carolina. It's an example of direct foreign investment. And again, I'm going to, in a second, ask you to put something in the chat box. But for your students who may not really think about this very often, you might want to jump in here and explain in a little more detail about direct foreign investment. And then I'm going to ask you, like I would ask my students, can you think of other examples of direct foreign investment where, companies from another country are investing into the United States, or the United States going the other way where we're investing in somewhere else? So if you could just in the chat box, write an example of a company that is from another country, maybe in your town, your city, your county, or your state. Actually, Hoshizaki, Honda, Michelin, Samsung, YKK, that's down the street from me, Kia again, Airbus, Toto, Hitachi, Nissan in Mississippi, Michelin again, Budweiser, there you go. Now, Budweiser used to be an American company, but now they're part of InBev, I believe, which is Dutch, I think. Daimler Chrysler, textile company, Nestle. All right, again, for you as educators, this is not a problem at all. You could probably list 20 each. But for your students, this is a good area maybe to send them to do a little research, or ask them, if their parents work for a company you know, from another country or something like that, to bring it sort of into their lives a little bit. Chris, hit the tab one time. So we got some examples here in Georgia of German companies. These are all German companies that have a presence in the state of Georgia. And this is just, you know, 7 or 8 or whatever it is of a few. I mean, there's hundreds in Georgia that are here employing Georgians, and that's fantastic. And again, your students may recognize, I'm sure they all know Adidas or Mercedes-Benz or Porsche. They might not know Steel makes chainsaws and ThyssenKrupp makes elevators and things like that. And then hit one more time, Chris, if you would. And please bring it around when you're doing this to also remind them again that there are US companies that are doing the same thing. So Coca-Cola, an Atlanta-based company, and UPS, Atlanta-based, they have facilities all over the globe. So they're also directly investing in foreign countries, just like, you know, Adidas and Porsche and things like that. Okay, thank you for all those great answers. All right, so that is the first part. And again, I'm going through this rather quickly because we have an hour and we've got a number of things to talk about. But with students, obviously, I'm going to take much longer than that to kind of hone in on these important factors that bring companies to South Carolina or Georgia or wherever it might be. So the second part of this particular lesson focuses on the question, what are the economic benefits for South Carolina as a result of BMW's decision to invest in Plant Spartanburg? And there's a student reading involved with this, and I'm not going to send you to it now and sit here and watch you guys read for the next 20 minutes, but it's a paper from the University of South Carolina that was done, I think it was their business school. They did it in 2014, which was the 20-year anniversary of BMW opening the facility in '94. So they started producing vehicles in '94. 20 years later, USC did this research to see, you know, what is the impact? What impact has it had on our state? And the paper itself, I think, is 12 pages long, and which is fine. But if you've got, you know, if you're teaching 8th grade students, 7th grade students, you're like, oh, they're not going to read that much. There is a 2-page summary, an executive summary at the beginning that I think really gets to the points that you want them to take out of this. And in a second, you guys are going to take a quiz that gets to the point that I kind of want you to pull out quickly. The paper talks about direct impact, indirect impact, and induced impact. And before sending students off to read the paper, no matter what grade they're in, I would definitely go over these things with them so they have a pretty good understanding of what the paper is talking about. And you guys can read the differences between the direct, indirect, and induced. You know, direct being, you know, things that BMW themselves are purchasing in South Carolina, whether it's labor or steel. And then the indirect would be, you know, I'm BMW, I buy steel from a steel plant in South Carolina, which causes them to purchase products to make that steel. And then the induced would be, you know, the folks that are spending their money because they've earned income because of the BMW presence in South Carolina. So that's what the paper looks at. So it's not just, you know, BMW buys this much steel and these many tires. No, it's the ripple effect and the multiplier effect around BMW being there. So we're going to take a very short quiz, and there's only 3 questions. And again, I pulled these right out of the executive summary. And Chris, fire away with the directions.
Yep, thanks, Mike. This one's pretty straightforward. Most of you who are familiar with GCE know we use a lot of Socrative or Socrative kind of things. So if you would, please, in your web browser, head to socrative.com. You need to log in as a student, even if you have a teacher account. In this case, log in as a student so you can get into my room instead of your own. And there should be the 3 questions should populate automatically. So while you guys go take that, I'm going to pause the recording. Just put in the chat box if you have any issues. It looks like people are already taking it, so that's good. I'm back on recording again. Yeah, Mike, I don't know how long you want to give them to do that. A lot of people are already in. We got a lot of missed answers there.
Oh, okay.
No perfect scores. There we go. Whoever that person is, I didn't have them put their names in.
Give that person a prize.
That's probably wood.
Probably. All right, we can come back.
Okay. Yeah, all right, you can close that out. If you're not familiar with Socrative, though, I'll just do a quick point here, technology-wise. One of the best things Socrative does for me and did for me in the classroom was this feature right here. It very easily shows you who's missing what. And if I had you put in your names, this would be a person's name here. And so I could look very quickly and see, or I could look by question. So for example, question 2, you guys seem to perform the best on. Question 1 and 3 are about equally as bad. So that would give me some feedback. If these were legit content questions that I would know I would want to touch on again with the students. So thanks for doing that. And now I think we're going to reveal the answers. Back to Mike.
Okay. So obviously, you know, this is guesswork. I mean, if you're not studying this regularly, it's like, I have no idea what this is. But again, I would want students to pull out of this, reading the executive summary, these big numbers, because they are massively huge numbers. I mean, if you think of a state like South Carolina, you know, you want to have a company come to your area that's going to have an annual economic output of directly and indirectly of, you know, more than $16 billion. I think most people would be like, yeah, sure, that sounds good to me, because that is a massively huge number. And again, if you've defined directly and indirectly and induced adequately, your students are going to realize it's not just, gee, they're making, you know, $16 billion worth of that SUVs. No, it's the overall economic impact for the entire, you know, BMW's presence in South Carolina. The other thing there is it's supporting a lot of jobs. And again, this does not mean 30,000 people walk into the BMW facility every day. It's the other jobs. And in the summary, there's a great cluster map of South Carolina that shows where all of the companies that support BMW have come. And by that, I mean, if BMW sets down there, they're going to need to buy tires and seats and headlights and all these other kinds of things. So other companies will come nearby and make tires and seats and headlights just for BMW. And the maps are really, there's a lot of dots on that map. So I highly recommend going over that yourself before sharing it with your students. And then lastly, the other big thing is this multiplier effect. The paper says for every direct job at BMW, those are the people walking through the front door. There are 3 additional jobs created elsewhere in South Carolina through the economic multiplier effect. Again, with Kia, we've been to Kia in Georgia, and they'll tell us, you know, just down the street is another company that you've never heard of. All they make for us is seats, and that company might employ 500 people. And then down the street's another company that we've never heard of, and all they do is produce, you know, wiring for the car or something like that. So there's all these other jobs that come along with BMW, because if you've never visited a car plant, they don't make everything themselves, right? It doesn't make sense. It makes more sense for them to purchase certain items for the vehicle, and that's exactly what they do. All right, next slide, Chris. Some other just points, these are just talking points that you can share. This is directly from the USC study. And again, it talks about the multiplier effect, the 3 jobs there, that was the last question. And another big point at the bottom, BMW's employment multiplier is one of the highest in the state. A company like BMW is going to have a higher multiplier than, you know, a company, let's say they're making barbecue or something. It's just, they don't need as many inputs from other companies, so it's not the same. But BMW is a huge multiplier, and that's why many states, when an auto manufacturer suggests they're going to come to your state, states are really happy, because auto manufacturers really do have one of the highest multipliers of any kind of company. So they're a big get for a state if you can get an auto manufacturer to come to your location. All right, Chris, next slide. We've got some more numbers on this next slide. These you can see from the U.S. Department of Commerce. BMW led the nation in automotive exports. This is, I think, last year this came out. So for the 6th year in a row. They do export a lot of the BMW X models. I'm pretty certain it's the only facility in the world that makes the X models, and a lot of them get exported. So again, if you're teaching trade, this is a great way to talk about imports and exports, and, you know, where are we getting things. And I think a lot of my students assumed that everything in our country was imported and we didn't export anything. And this slide can kind of debunk that a little bit and get them thinking another way. You can see that the sheer numbers of exported vehicles in that 10-year period there, it's pretty huge. And then lastly, we've talked about this in the first chat box thing we did. It's the largest BMW plant in the world in terms of vehicle production volume, right there in South Carolina, which links back to that video. Like, you know, who would think that, right? Okay, next. So I've got a question. At what point in your curriculum do you use this lesson? Again, I'm not in the classroom anymore, but if I was in the classroom, I would definitely use it in my international trade unit to talk about things like that last slide and just how, you know, direct foreign investment it's a huge, big thing. And I could also bring in comparative advantage a little bit when I'm talking about BMW having to go out and buy seats and headlights and not making everything themselves. All right, so the next supporting question, which is the last one, which is very, very timely, you know, because in the news in the last year or two, there's been a lot of talk about tariffs. And this question is, how will proposed steel and aluminum tariffs affect BMW's ability to produce vehicles in South Carolina? As you know, a vehicle, there's a lot of steel in a vehicle. I think like 50% of the vehicle, like the normal SUV, is made of steel. And then like 10% of it's aluminum. So there's a lot of aluminum and steel in these BMWs. And so it's, you know, a change in tariffs is going to really impact BMW's ability to make these things at a good cost for them. So here I'm going to go over and I'm going to, you know, talk about what a tariff is, tax on an imported or exported goods, reinforce that. And again, the question that I just answered there, this is a good place to talk about tariffs. And again, here in the lesson, there's a student reading. It's an article, New York Times article about this, right? When tariffs are being proposed, this particular writer asked, like, what's this going to mean specifically for BMW? And I'm not going to have you read it here. Again, it would take too long, but a great opportunity for students to read this. And it also, in this lesson, there's a number of headlines, like from different news sources, that kind of show the ups and downs of tariffs, like it's going to help this group, it's going to hurt this group. And ultimately, I would want my student to take this part of the lesson and answer these questions of who was helped, who was hurt, okay? So what we're going to do, and you know, there's a number of different ways you can do this with your students when you're actually doing this. In the classroom, at this point of the lesson, I would have all of my students stand up and I would mark off one side of the room helped, one side of the room hurt. And then when I read the different examples, I would have my students actually move to those sides to sort of vote with their feet kind of thing. Here, obviously, we can't do that. So in the chat box, again, as we go through these, if you could just type helped or hurt or question mark if you're not sure, and we'll kind of go through one at a time, just as your students would do in this lesson in your classroom. All right, so the first example that I want to ask you is this. If you could click that, Chris, one time. All right, so we're talking about a U.S. auto parts manufacturer that uses a lot of imported steel to make their products. So if you could type helped, hurt in the chat box. So I'm seeing a lot of hurt, and that's good. All right, so it seems to be everyone's getting this hurt. I wish all of my students got all the answers right, like you guys are getting right. Thank you. The second one, click it again, Chris, if we would. A U.S. senator from a steel producing state. Is he or she helped or hurt? U.S. senator from a steel producing state. Okay, seeing a lot of help, a couple hurts here and there. So someone typed re-elected. Yes, help. So it's in office, helped. So yeah, I mean, if you're a senator from a steel producing state here in the United States, this action will most likely cause companies to use more of your steel, right? So if you're a U.S. steel producer, you're not paying this tariff. So it's like, ooh, our steel is lower cost compared to the imported stuff. And this is what we talked about right as we were getting started. So yeah, this one I would say is going to be helped. Third one, what do we got, Chris? Third one is U.S. aluminum industry workers. So there are a number of aluminum companies here in the United States, and we're seeing helped. Yeah, you guys get this one. So again, your aluminum prices are looking more competitive because you're not paying that tariff like these foreign aluminum makers are. All right, fourth one. Coca-Cola. Huh. What do you think? I see helped, hurt, helped. mostly hurt, couple helps here and there. Depends where there are cans. That's a good answer. Depends. I always like that answer. If you're Coca-Cola, you are buying, and I actually had a meeting at Coca-Cola once, and they told me how much aluminum they buy every year, and it was just astronomical. They do not buy all of their aluminum from companies in the United States. So assuming they do buy a lot from overseas, ultimately, I think this is going to hurt their bottom line, because the tariff is going to push up the price of aluminum, obviously, for imported aluminum, which might also maybe allow the US prices to go up a tiny bit as well. So Coca-Cola is not happy when aluminum prices go up. I can tell you that much, because it really does hurt their bottom line. Next one, Chris, what do we got? Foreign auto tool and machine part makers. See, these are companies in other countries making auto parts and machines. I see helped. Helped, a couple hurts here and there. Hurt. And again, we get sort of different answers here. And again, some of these my little questions are very short. When you actually get the lesson, there's more explanation to all of these, which I think would make it a little easier to answer. But if you're a foreign auto tool and machine part maker, you know, ultimately, you're not paying the tariff. So this makes you more attractive versus the US. Next one, Chris, what do we got? BMW worker at Plant Spartanburg. What do we think? Hurt, seeing a lot of hurts. Yeah, ultimately, the point of this lesson, or excuse me, the article itself is that, you know, ultimately these tariffs could hurt the BMW workers at Plant Spartanburg, because again, it's all of a sudden it's costing BMW more to make that BMW, and they might not sell as much because price goes up. So that's ultimately, you know, the takeaway from that particular example. All right, so anyway, again, I think this is a nice current event-y kind of way to bring this lesson all together when you're talking about this, because it's a real world example of tariffs. When you're teaching tariffs, you know, it's a tax on an imported good, big deal, who cares? But when you bring it into an actual company that might be in your town or the next state over, and talks about actual workers and how it might impact them, I think it gives a lot more heft, and it gets students to buy in a lot more. I think that was my experience anyway in my classroom. Okay, what we got for the next slide, Chris? Okay, so the lesson concludes with a summative task and extension activity options. And for me, this would be, this is where the gold is in this lesson, I think, because this, up until this point, this is a very, you know, rose-colored glasses. This is great. They're coming here. Everything's positive. All this extra money's coming into the state. But as you know, there's always groups out there or people out there who are saying, well, this isn't such a great idea, and those numbers aren't real. So I would ask my students to, you know, construct some kind of essay or poster or PowerPoint or something that addresses the questions we talked about, but then also acknowledge competing views, right? So if you, at the end of the hour, if you go and you start researching BMW in South Carolina, you know, costs and benefits, you're going to find a lot of articles who are going to say, well, you know, maybe this wasn't worth it because each job that's there costs X number of dollars to bring there, and that's a huge number. So there's always that other side, that other competing view that I would want my kids to think about, know about, not just think this is the greatest thing ever, right? Because there's always critics of this kind of thing. So that's one particular summative task that you might want to try to do with your kids. The other extension activity that you may want to do, which we touched on a little bit ago, was this idea of direct foreign investment, and get your kids thinking and looking and researching about companies in their area that are actually from other countries. And I think if you've never done this either, I think you're going to be really surprised at how many foreign companies are in your state. I know here in Georgia, you know, hundreds of thousands of Georgians work for companies that are headquartered in other states. And just in my town, I mean, you know, right around me within 5 miles, there's probably 10 different companies that are foreign owned that are doing business here. So anyway, so that's another way to kind of look at this and get your students diving in a little deeper to look at these particular topics. All right, so ultimately, again, that link there will take you straight to the actual lesson, excuse me, the publication with the lesson in it. And that's always going to be here. So please, 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 give it a look when you get a chance. Great publication. And if you teach other subjects other than econ, again, there's geography in there, history in there, sustainability's in there. So there's a lot of really cool things that, like this lesson, you can take online during this, teaching from home situation. And I think rather quickly turn them into activities for your students to do, that they can really get some great learning out of them. All right, next slide, Chris. So questions about the lesson. And again, we've got just a few minutes, so maybe a question. We don't have a ton of time here. We're good? All right, let's move on then, Chris, for the point of time. All right, so we're gonna switch gears now, and I wanna talk for the next 12 minutes or so about the top study tours. And we can start with this great little video. Go ahead, Chris.
We've been to so many different places. Frankfurt and Bad Wildbad, Heidelberg and Polytechnic Stiftung and Goethe and Berlin.
That's most surprising is seeing how Germany is working to embrace its diversity.
We learned about the coalition and the Green Party.
Devotion to environmentalism.
And for example, going to the Deutsche Bank and seeing a modern skyscraper that doesn't have air conditioning, uses rainwater for some of its plumbing.
This is cool, huh? It's so awesome.
The standards that I teach are World War I, World War II, and the Holocaust. So before I came here, they asked us to write down those 3 words. What do you know about Germany? And I wrote aggression, beer, and Holocaust, which isn't really a great thing to think about a country. The first day we got here, I was talking to somebody next to me about this beautiful gold dome building I'd seen out of my hotel room. And this stranger was listening while we were talking and stopped everything of their wonderful Sunday excursion to take us for a walk to go see it. And it's just immediately, right? I'd been here 2 hours and I already lost all of those words that I brought with me. So my new 3 words that I wrote yesterday were hospitality, openness, and determination.
And if you come here, you can, especially talking to people on the subway, talking to people at a restaurant, they will give you honest answers. I don't think just reading things out of a book can really give you that authenticity.
We've set up an exchange with a German teacher I met while on my study tour, and his class of students and my class of students are going to be sending each other videos and perhaps
Did it, Chris?
Skyping so that they can continue to learn more about each other's culture and way of life. When we were on our study tour, they asked us, what are 3 words that come to mind when you hear Germany? And I wanted to hear what you think of that. What are 3 words that come to your minds?
Okay. Great little video. And as it was playing, someone typed in the chat box there, I did one of these tours 12 years ago and it was an amazing experience. Yes, I would totally agree. I've been in education now 21 years, I think it is. And I've done a number of study tours and a number of great different things, visited a lot of manufacturing facilities. And I put my experiences on these top study tours, #1 on that list by far. Just wonderful, great, you get so much out of it. And most importantly, when you come back to your classroom, you've got great experiences and great stories to tell your students that really, again, bring together the relationship between the United States and Germany, and all the great things that we're doing together and have been doing together for a number of years. Just some basic facts, if you're not familiar with this. The study tours themselves are 2 weeks in length, traveling during June and July. All expenses are paid. You do pay like a baggage fee for a flight, or if you go out at night on your own, that's on your own, or if you buy souvenirs, that kind of thing. But your flights, the hotels, the meals paid for by the Transatlantic Outreach Program. The application process itself comes out, it's online in October, and the deadline is usually late January, so when you have to have your application in. And you can see there the eligible applicants: K-12 social studies and STEM educators, university methods professors, curriculum developers, administrators. Those are the people that can actually apply and go. When you do go, it's not like we're just going to be on a bus driving around looking out the window the whole time. No, you really get in there and get involved. You visit schools, you go into classrooms. I've been in multiple German classrooms, seeing people like me teach in Germany. You go to businesses, big businesses, small businesses, from I've been at BMW down to small companies that employ like 4 different people. You also visit government institutions, and you visit a lot of historical sites. And for me, it's the whole experience. You're experiencing modern Germany in Germany, right? You're there, you're living like a German, you're eating like a German. It's wonderful. I mean, I cannot say enough great things about this particular trip. 2 pictures there. One is Dresden, the church that was reconstructed after World War II. And then the stumble stones, which you're seeing in many German cities now, which if you're not familiar with stumble stones or tripping stones, Google that, because they're really fascinating to see, and it's a great historical lesson throughout Germany. All right, next slide, Chris. All right, so these are just some photos of different things that I experienced on 2 of my trips. And I mentioned earlier, you visit schools, and this is a photo taken at a school, high school, where students are learning to be plumbers and construction workers. And this is the principal who gave us a tour. And we walked into this room, and on the wall was like plumbing that you would see in a house that is like there for you to see. And I was like, wow, that's how plumbing works. And what I liked most about it is that the actual brand, like the toilet there, you can see it's a German brand of toilet. And there's this relationship between German companies and German schools, where the German companies give the schools the equipment that these students are gonna, they're gonna have to know how to work on this kind of product, so that the businesses give it to the schools, and then the schools teach the students how to work with this. In that same school, they also had an automotive shop, and we went into the shop, and all of the vehicles that kids were working on were like brand new BMWs and brand new Mercedes-Benzes that the companies gave to the school, so these kids knew how to work on the latest, greatest, newest technology. And then finally at the school, there was a large room, kind of like a high school gym in our country, and in it, the students throughout the year built an actual house. Like that was their project, because they're going to be construction workers and they needed to know how to do this. So throughout the year, they built this house, and at the end of the year, they take it down, and then the next year's class does it again. So I thought that the way they bring in education and businesses and government together, to me, was really, really fantastic. And their tech program, what we would call it, is really, I think, light years ahead of where we are. Next one, Chris. This is from the VW headquarters in Wolfsburg. And when you go to Wolfsburg, it's a company town. VW is everywhere in that town. And this facility, if you actually buy a Volkswagen, you can go and pick it up. And this is like a 5 or 6 story tall cylinder. And these machines go up and they pull out your car and they bring it down, and you're at the bottom waiting for it, and you drive it away. So again, this is something like high tech, really slick, great, huge company, and they allow you to come in and actually see how they're making things, which is fantastic. Next one, Chris. So this was in Leipzig, and it's when the revolution started. There was a church right next to this building where people were meeting and talking about, they weren't really happy with the government anymore, and eventually this kind of led to the revolution that brought the wall down. And this is a sort of a monument to the folks that lost their lives during the struggle. And again, this is something that was literally outside my hotel window. I could see it from where my bed was. And you just learn about these things that if you went to Germany by yourself as a tourist, you might miss a lot of this. But because you're with Germans in each town, you have 2 or 3 German leaders with you. They take you, and it's just all this behind the scenes, really great deep dive into German history, German culture, German business, German education, that you just probably would not get yourself going there alone. And then the last slide, I think, is one of the most important parts of these tours is the people that you meet and the people that you spend time with. So when you go on this tour, you meet in Washington, D.C. at the top headquarters, and you become a family with 12 or 14 people virtually overnight, because it's like, hey, I've never met any of you, but we're going to spend the next 2 weeks together, in hotels, on a bus, and eating together. And it really is a great way to meet people like you all across the country. So in this photo, there's 4 or 5 people that they're my friends now, and I didn't know them until I went on these trips. And I still communicate with them regularly, like every month I'm in contact with a number of these people. And that is a great way to build sort of your professional abilities, is you can share and talk and share different practices with these people that you've gone through this great experience with. And again, it's just a great way to expand yourself and become a better teacher, so that when you come back to the United States, you can offer your students a lot more in your classroom. It's absolutely wonderful. And this photo is in the Reichstag, where the government meets, and it's everyone, if you go on one of these tours, you're going to get to go there. All right, so and there was a comment from that I read there that VW tower that we showed a couple slides back, you don't have to go back, Chris, was actually in one of the Mission Impossible movies. So you might have recognized that. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. Are there any questions about the study tour itself, about the lessons, or about how you access all of these materials going forward? I hope there's a question or two. And Chris, if you've seen any, we will get these in an email. That's correct, right?
Yes, I will email a link to the presentation itself is huge. So it'll be, I'll save it to a Google file and share it out as soon as I get the, probably sometime tomorrow, as soon as I get the Socrative built. Okay,
another comment that I saw within here is that the people in Washington at the top offices, there are a couple of them are on this call, and when you go to their website, you'll find their information, and they are always super, super helpful. They could not be more helpful in answering all of your questions that you might have about any of this, the lessons or the actual study tours. Thanks for sharing the resources. Thank you. Thank you for all of you who attended. We had a really great turnout. Yeah, so I think we're good if there's no more questions. Thank you.
It probably goes without saying that, obviously you'd be applying for next year.
Yep. Yeah. So again,
just to clarify,
October. I can give you a couple little small tidbits of information in the application. I always tell people when I do these workshops, if you want me to proofread it, I will be happy to do it, but give me some time to do it. Don't say this is due tomorrow. Can I have it in 3 minutes? Something I recommend is that when you do it and complete it, find the best language arts teacher in your building who is really good at grammar, and have he or she go through it at least once. Have people look at it that aren't you, because you might think, oh, this is perfect, but then you send it in and there's a lot of typos and stuff like that. So please, please, please have other people read it over, bounce ideas off other people, and talk about, how is this going to impact your coworkers, your community, and your students when you come back from Germany? What will you do with this information? And for me, that was the icing on the cake. Great tour, great materials, but ultimately I was a better teacher, and my students learned way more than they would have learned if I had not gone on this trip. Yep. All right.
Mike, there was a question we missed. It was, what is involved in the application process? Like, just real quick, like what are they, just basically what are they ask on the application? I think.
Yeah, so, and if you could, or Jenny, if you guys want to chime in quickly, but I think typically there's 3 essays. And one is sort of, you get to pick like a topic to write about. And then I think there's one like how will this impact your students when you come back home? And like a lesson plan idea, I believe. Those are your 3. And when you go to the top website, the study tour section, it very clearly states, these are the kinds of things we're looking for, that, we offer this advice before you turn it in. So there's a lot of it explained within that. And it also gives you, like, typically I want to say 10 hours. I think they say it's going to take you about 10 hours to do this. So don't wait, for the night before. And you've got, when it comes out in October, you got 3-4 months to do it. So my advice is to kind of, peck away at it, do one and sit on it for a while, and then do the others, and ultimately turn it all in. Okay. So thank you very, very much for coming. I wish you all the best during all these strange times. And thank you for what you're doing. Wood Powell from TOP, what do you got?
Hello, sir. I'd just like to extend a special thanks to Mike and Chris for leading the charge here on our inaugural virtual workshop here. We've actually never done anything really like this before, especially in this kind of context. And it's been awesome. I've learned a lot here. And I thank Mike and Chris for being awesome superstars and being such supportive people of the top program in general. And it's through you guys that we grow to become a better program. And I want to thank all the alumni who are here and all the new faces of the approximately 70 people who are participating. So awesome turnout. Thank you so much. We are available to answer any questions you might have via social media or via our website or email. As Mike said, due to the present situation, we unfortunately had to cancel our 2020 studies tours for the first time in over 15 years because we couldn't ensure the safety of our participants this year and of our hosts and of our colleagues and everyone who's involved. But we are putting all of our devotion and plans and energy into what we want to be a amazing summer 2021. So that's where we're headed. And we're happy to help guide anyone through applications if they have any questions or anything like that as it all becomes available.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Right.
And we wish
Thanks,
everyone well and health and safety. Okay.
All right.